selling a house is stressful and going through a divorce is stressful. And so having somebody who can really be, I don't want to say unemotional, but really just cool in the situation when emotions rise up, to be able to have really level-headed options and considerations and next steps, and let's take a break and come back, can help make a potentially even more stressful situation a little bit less stressful.
Welcome to the Divorce Discussions Podcast, where professionals share practical guidance to help you move through divorce with clarity and confidence. Let's get into the discussion.
Almost nobody warns you about this part. In the middle of a divorce, when you're already carrying so much, you also have to figure out what's happening with your home. But if we're being honest, it's never just about a house. It's the kitchen where you had your morning coffee, the door frame where the little pencil marks of how tall your kids are getting stand. So when someone hands you one of the biggest financial decisions of your life and asks, are you keeping it or are you selling it? It hits as a memory and a number at the very same time, and that's what can make it so hard. But here's what I want you to hear at the beginning of this episode. You don't have to make this decision in the dark, and you absolutely do not have to make it alone. Welcome to Divorce Discussions. I'm your host, Angie Weber, the director at the Divorce Support Collective, where we are on a mission to reimagine the process of divorce through collaboration and support. And my guest today is exactly the person you want in your corner for this type of moment. Kimberly Reeves is the founder of Reeves Advisory Collective, and she has this calm, steady, okay, let's figure this out together energy. That's the opposite of about most people feel while their home is suddenly up in the air. She helps people make smart real estate decisions during life's biggest transitions, divorce obviously being a really tender one, with a ton of care and a sharp eye for the numbers. Kimberly, I'm so excited that you're here. Welcome to the discussion.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here as well.
Absolutely. Well, again, this is one of the biggest questions that people struggle with when they go through divorce, because it's usually who gets the kids and who gets the house. And so obviously divorce is, there's so much uncertainty and things that people have to think about, and if they're getting thrown into this, or maybe right at the beginning stages of all of it, how do they even start navigating whether to keep or sell their house when they have to think about, again, the kids and the retirement accounts, and are we using a lawyer or a mediator? I mean, how do you even begin this journey of figuring out what to do with the home?
You are absolutely right. There are so many multiple questions that are needing to be answered at the same time. And it's helpful when you have professionals in those disciplines to be able to walk through some of the questions and then some of the options. I can speak specifically on the real estate side. Working in tandem with mortgage with lenders and with financial advisors, we're able to help people be able to understand what their options are. One of the things on my end that we first look at is what's the value of the house. And that helps in factoring out, the buyout process, and some of the financials for the person who's keeping the house. And then we're looking at a lot of different variables like upkeep. If one person is having the house, like, does that person want to take care of the upkeep? Because it's another level of responsibility on top of a new season where things are changing. We're looking at, the kids and school districts and a lot of these different questions that it just takes a little bit of time to slow down and walk through before trying to see, is there a clear path forward?
Sure. Now, people might be thinking, like, Kimberly, we're at the very beginning of this. Like, do I have to make the decision about the house right now, or can we figure out a few other things before we even think about that? Or are we going to completely regret it if we don't think about the house first?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it depends on, timing and what's happening on the legal side. I can speak to, I had a client recently who they were trying to decide if they were going to keep the house. One of them was for sure going to keep the house. And I was connected with the female by a mediator that they were working with. And so she and I just walked through the house. I provided a value for the couple. They were both on the email with the mediator when I sent the value over, so they could use that piece. They needed that piece anyway when they were trying to run some numbers. And then she and I walked through the house with the lens of, if she were to keep it, these are some things that she would likely need to do in the next few years, and maintenance that would need to be considered, and like general upkeep. When we did that part, she still wasn't really sure. And so then we looked at, okay, well, let's say you were to buy. Let's go look at some things that you might be interested in buying. After that first time out, we looked at maybe 3 houses. She decided it was really clear for her that she did want to purchase something. We were looking at some options. She ended up ultimately getting a townhome, because in a townhome situation, you have maintenance taken care of in terms of lawn maintenance and snow maintenance. And so for her, that was really important because she would be navigating this new season as a single parent.
Yeah.
And so those are some of the things that there's not a formula, but that's generally my approach of, let's try and figure out, the first part, which is generally assessing the house, the value of the house. And then what's that next right step after that, or next 2 steps to start thinking about options.
Yeah. And I love how you bring in like what needs to happen to the house, because it's not just, okay, I need to pay for the mortgage. It is forecasting into the future of, okay, what repairs might need to be done. Maybe our furnace here in Minnesota, because you're here in Minnesota with me, that's a big issue here. We need to have heat during the winter. Maybe your furnace is, 20, 30 years old, and you're just crossing your fingers and toes that it's not going to need an update anytime soon, but it could potentially be. And so that's all really good things to take in consideration. But as we kind of started out the episode, though, there's so much emotional value tied to a house. It's not just, this is where we live, this is where we brought the kids home, or this is where we did our first, big family gathering for Christmas, or fill in the blank. How do you help people see it from more of a numbers aspect when there's so much so much emotional attachment to it?
Yeah, so we look at the numbers of what it would be to sell, right? What that not necessarily to sell, but sometimes the buyout, right? What's the value of the house? And then we walk through what that monthly payment would look like if they were to stay. I'm working in collaboration with lenders and with financial planners, because it's a large financial picture, and there's multiple disciplines that kind of come in when making this decision. So I have resources in those areas where we're really able to help the spouses, or one spouse, be able to walk through the numbers. I will say too, on the emotional side, sometimes there's negative emotions that are attached to the house too. And so in this situation with this woman who ended up buying a townhouse, she was really excited to start creating new memories with her kids in a space that was new to them. So I think, yes, there are those kind of bittersweet where you're saying goodbye to maybe the house that you brought the kids home in. And there's new chapters too. And sometimes new space feels like a clean start.
Yeah, I love that outlook, because besides being the director of the Divorce Support Collective, I'm also a parent coach who helps co-parents. And that's something, even around like the holidays, can be really hard for parents to kind of wrap their head around of, oh my gosh, now I need to split my kids between the holidays when, I was the one waiting for them with that cup of coffee for them to come down the stairs and see the presents, or to, make the turkey for whatever it is. And I love that perspective of, just because we're closing this chapter, there's this exciting new thing about to happen where we can create new traditions and our own memories. And maybe that's in a different space than we were at before. So I love that perspective, because no one plans for divorce. Just as I say, no one really plans for co-parenting. They're not like, let's have a baby together, and then I can't wait to co-parent with you in 5 years. It's going to be so fun. It's just facts of life that happen sometimes. And so for someone who is leaning more towards, okay, I think I do need to find a new place to live, whether whether they have kids or not, because we know not every divorced couple has kids as well. How can they start that process again when stuff feels so uncertain in the moment?
Well, there are some things that end up where you end up having parameters around. So if there are school age children involved, then there's a natural school district that someone may want to be within or close to. We look at if there's any faith groups, if there's work that we're kind of looking around, and then lifestyle. So trying to understand, in Minnesota, we have a very active trail system and park system. So I have some clients who are bikers and they want to be able to jump on one of the trails and go for a long bike ride to get to, a fun location. So those are some things that I ask.
Yeah.
And then, just trying to understand if they have friends around, just trying to see where the community is really, because when we go through big life changes, community is so important. And so having the community piece of things be easier is helpful sometimes for that next season.
Yeah, I love that perspective too, because it's not just necessarily like finding something that you can afford. It's making sure that this is also going to fit your lifestyle because you're already going through so much transition as it is. We want to make sure that that next move isn't just, and I'm sure in some case it is like, oh, I just need a quick fix for the moment, but really focusing on that longevity of this is where I'm going to feel most grounded and it's going to fit a lot of the things that I'm looking for. Now, we've already kind of talked about things that you should do. You should look at, what are the upcoming expenses? Does it make sense financially to stay there? Does it make sense for my family? Are we looking for a place for new traditions? But maybe what are some things that you see, Kimberly, that are some do not do's for people going through a divorce that can actually really set them back either financially or emotionally while going through a divorce when it comes to staying or selling a house?
Yeah, I would say utilizing the different partners that are involved in a transaction. So I've done extensive work and training in understanding a lot of strategy that goes behind divorce. So while I am not a CPA and I am not a financial advisor, I am able to do things like take a look at what potential capital gains taxes would be on a house. And then I can take that information and I can provide that to the potential seller to say, if you were to keep this house, you would go from being a married person with a larger, it's $500,000 right now for a married couple for the deduction. And as a single, it's 250,000. So really trying to work with different professionals in advance before the decree is signed so that if there are things to negotiate, that those can be factored in to the decree before that's finalized. We're seeing a lot more. I am seeing a lot more. I think it is maybe a general trend of kind of they're calling it, I think, like silver divorce. So like the couples who are older and who are getting divorced. And if you've been in a house for 30 years, it potentially has gone up in value a lot. And so that potential capital gains tax can be rather a large cost to someone if they choose to stay in the house. So having some of those understandings early on and being able to negotiate that into the decree, even in terms of refinancing, if somebody were to stay in the house and refinancing, rates may be higher than what they were. There might be a cost to refinance that then doesn't get factored in when expenses are being split up. So talking to the professionals who work in these spaces to have that understanding and to run the numbers in advance is very helpful.
Yeah, I love your approach on the collaborativeness of everything, and you've brought it up a few times, and I did want to circle back to it. So maybe this is a good time in the episode because at the Divorce Support Collective, we are the same way. We're all about collaboration and support, and we want to make sure people understand that it's not just about getting a lawyer and it's going to solve everything for your divorce. It's not just getting, the real estate agent. It's the real estate agent and the financial person and the mortgage lender, and there's so many pieces to the pie when you're really coming up with this support system when you go through a divorce, because if you only have one part of it, you're probably going to struggle quite a bit. And you might look back at your decisions and say, oh gosh, I wish I would have known this before. And that's what I love about your approach too, is you're like, nope, I can't do everything for you, but I'm really good at this part. And I have a lot of trusted people in my corner that can help with these other pieces when it comes to your home. And another guest that we had on here, who you actually introduced me to, and he's a member of the Divorce Support Collective, is Mitch Irwin here in Minnesota as well. And so if people are outside of the area that you can serve, maybe what are some questions with people going through divorce that they should be asking a real estate agent or advisor on, to make sure that it's the right fit and they're really kind of helping with that collaborative approach?
Yeah, so there's a nationwide network. I'm with the brokerage that I am with, and I think it's just expanded into all brokerages. But it was formerly through Keller Williams, called the Real Estate Planner Community, and so there are agents all across the country who have similar training. So understanding or like finding someone that's part of that community, I'm happy to be a resource for people. Asking the questions of how many divorces have you helped people sell or buy, understanding what the skill level is with that, like there's additional training that can be done. Have people gone through additional training to really understand what that looks like? You had mentioned Mitch Irwin. Mitch specializes in working with divorce and running numbers. So somebody like Mitch, asking him or asking a lender, like, can you help me model out what it would look like if I stay in the house and I pay a spouse out? What happens if I take it from my 401k? What happens if I take it out of home equity and pay my spouse out that way? And someone like Mitch can model that out and say the future cost would be X if you took it out of your 401k versus if we refinanced and took out a home equity line of credit for you. So understanding, can somebody help model that, my options for me? Can we talk through what that looks like? Asking if, with real estate specifically, like, who are the partners you work with? And if they have a really strong network, then there's other trusted professionals that are working with them. And it is that more collaborative to try and help. And if they don't have, people that can help in those spaces, in lending and in financial advising, and in the tax space, then, that would be a little bit of work. Then you might not even know what you need, right? And so it really is. I talk about having a team often, because it really is a team approach, because we are in our disciplines of what we've been trained and licensed to do. And with an investment like a house, it's typically somebody's largest single financial asset. And it's important. And so there's a lot of care that comes into that too.
Yeah, again, I love the collaborative approach. I thank you for sharing that, because again, I know there's some people listening who are outside of the Minnesota or the Midwest region, and so we want to make sure that we provide them with help. And I always say too, and we've talked about this on other episodes, when even talking with like our member Nancy Gabriel, who's in Nevada, and she's a mediator. Obviously she can't necessarily help someone over in New York. So we talk about like, what are some questions, kind of like dating these professionals before you necessarily say like, okay, let's team up together and let's move forward with this. I think in divorce that people, again, there's so much uncertainty, and sometimes it can feel so urgent because of that uncertainty of, oh, we need to figure everything out right now. But sometimes we need to take a step back and kind of take that deep breath and figure out what is the next right step, what are all the right steps at the same time, is so absolutely important. So what are some other things you're seeing? Because you kind of mentioned the silver divorce. Some of our listeners, that's also typically referred to as a gray divorce, which is very much more popular nowadays, of someone who's, been maybe in their house and they do have that really low mortgage rate where they're like, Kimberly, I think we might just try put a wall up so that we can just stay in the house because we don't want to get rid of that. But what are some other considerations that you're kind of seeing in the divorce arena that people are coming into contact with when deciding to stay or to sell, maybe that they haven't even thought of before?
Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit with the schools,
Mm,
with the kids in the schools, and I've got one person right now who is in one area, and the spouse is now in another area, and then logistically that becomes really hard with then driving and moving communities, and where do the kids go? Those are things that typically, a parenting support would walk through with the parents, and legal would walk through with them to get that all um, to agreement. And that's something that, when we're looking at on the house side, that we're talking through. Um, how we spend our time in community matters. And so if we're spending a lot of time in the car, that just changes sometimes stress levels, and sometimes the ability to relax or be in community in different ways. And so with kids, especially, having that stability of community is helpful.
yeah. Now, in a divorce situation, have you ever been in the situation where the one spouse is saying, no, we both just need to sell, get rid of it, and the other one is digging in their heels, even maybe when it doesn't make financial sense to keep, for one of them to keep the house?
Yes, and that's where, again, working with somebody who can run some numbers. I can on the house side, right? But I don't have the full financial picture. And so working with a wealth coach, working with a lender, working with a financial advisor to help run some numbers, to understand what that looks like. I talked with somebody recently who she's looking to keep the house. She's not sure, what that will look like on her salary. And so one of the things was, well, what does it look like if you bring in, potentially like a female college student, or if you bring in someone who could rent a room from you? Would that help give a financial cushion, and even a little bit of support? It gets tricky because then the other spouse needs to be okay with somebody living in the house with the child, and there's a lot of levels that come with that. It's just one of those things where we try and exhaust all the options, and it's better to be able to figure out in advance the financial piece, and does that feel stressful and heavy, um, before making that decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I love your creative approach of like, well, what else can we do here before we just say, well, this is the only way, or these are the only numbers we can look at? What are some other options? And as you already mentioned, excuse me, gray divorce is becoming a lot more popular. And so with a gray divorce, for example, let's say that the wife is going to stay in a heterosexual, couple, let's say the wife is going to stay in the house, and, they haven't lived alone for a really long time, and maybe they don't want to. So maybe the thought of like a Golden Girls type of situation is right up their alley, right? Where they're like, hey, let's bring in another maybe woman around my age, and we can be more of the roommates stuff. And so I like that you offer that to your clients versus just looking at it through one lens. You're looking at it through multiple, and really giving the options to your clients too. Again, you're not there just to be like, this is what you have to do. You just make all the information available to them so that they can make the decision. But what happens when they're sitting there and they're looking at all the options and they still feel so stuck and paralyzed by this decision? Or maybe there's a listener who is like, I've seen all the numbers, Kimberly, I know all my options, and I'm still struggling with that question of, should I sell or should I stay here? What would you give to them?
Yeah, so if we've already done that, where we've looked at the numbers on the sell side, and we've looked at the numbers, or we've gone out and looked at potential next step options. um it depends, right? I am not here to tell someone this is what you have to do. Hopefully they're working with, that may be like an emotional stuckness. So hopefully they're working with someone, or they have someone to process that with. that is not my specialty. And I know that like I can ask questions of things. I had a client recently who they were really close on like saying that we're helping them buy, and they were really close on this one house, and they're like, we think we have to say no. And so I just asked them like, you guys might have already thought about this. Here are 3 extra questions to try and determine like, is this a short-term problem or is this a long-term problem? So from my end, I would probably be asking those questions of that person too. I always say, you don't have to answer me. These are questions for you to think about, kind of think through. These are the questions I probably would be asking at this point. And my goal is to make sure that we aren't, in this particular situation where these people were looking to potentially make an offer on a house. I just wanted them to know, like, if in 2 days somebody else makes an offer on this house and gets it, and you say, I wish we would have thought about this.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask those hard questions early so that we're not missing out on something later. And so for somebody who's feeling emotionally stuck, I have a level of questions that I can ask it, and it may be time for them to find a partner, or a resource if they don't already have one, to ask those additional questions.
Yeah. No, I love that. Because again, I think sometimes even when, I talk about how we have a rational brain, an emotional brain, and then we have our wise mind or our wise brain. And sometimes we can get stuck on one of the extremes when we want to kind of pair the two together to, again, make the best decisions. But like you said during this interview, you just don't know what you don't know. And that's why you need the experts in their own lanes to be able to help guide you and kind of clarify that picture that could be in the future versus going into it feeling like you're in the dark or overwhelmed with all the different options. Now, some listeners might be thinking, all right, well, Kimberly, you're a real estate agent. So of course, if we sell, you want me to buy another house. But has there been other situations when it's actually better for your clients to maybe do a short-term rental in that situation?
Yes. So I'm helping someone, or I've helped someone who they have a short amount of time where they have so it's a divorce situation and needs to be in the state for a certain amount of time, and then there will be a high school graduation, and then they can go. And so they chose, the house wasn't really working at that point. They chose to find a rental, and then they're renting until they can be at a place where they can leave and go to their next place. So there are definitely times where in the short term, it might make sense to rent for a little bit. It might make sense to move in with a parent to get, back on your feet again, and then figure out what that next right step is. And that's where the education piece comes into, of what are the risks? I talk a lot about risks. What are the risks to buy too early? What are the risks to rent if really you could be buying, right? And then, again, trying to make sure that we have the right partners in place so that they're making informed decisions versus, oh, I think I should, based on what they've heard on the news or, different things. I'm always trying to get, the right information so they can make an informed decision, and feel comfortable about that.
Yeah. And again, I just want to make it so clear to all the listeners here who we know that there are people listening who maybe haven't even had the conversation with their spouse of, I think we should get divorced, or let's look at what that looks like. There could be people listening who are in the middle of the thick of it right now, who are feeling that overwhelm. And there could be people who are on the other side of the decree thinking, what does this next chapter look like in my life? And it's just so important that you find people on your A team that are going to be there to support you for the right reasons, like Kimberly does, and not just looking at you as a transaction. And in the spirit of talking about your A team and your collaboration and your partners, outside, just with all of the divorces that you have been able to help people through, outside of kind of the real estate realm, what are some other professionals that you feel are super necessary to help people kind of thrive as best as they can through the divorce situation?
Yeah, I think finding the attorney or the mediator to help, if that's the direction of needing legal help, is very important. There are some places now that are also providing counseling, emotional counseling through like coaching through that, or having an independent person. There are a lot of people who've gone before. Um, in the divorce space, right? Specifically, a few women that I know who have gone through divorce and are coaching and helping people through that on the other side. And then, like I've talked about, having the right real estate partner, the right lender partner, the right financial advisor, the right CPA, if there's a tax question, and just really having that team of both emotional and then someone like you, right? When you with parenting and co-parenting, really trying to get the support that's necessary that we don't even sometimes know we need, and it might be short term, but it's a big change in life, and having the support in place, even though if there may be a short term cost for it, may really set up well long term in terms of social and emotional and financial and that stability. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Kimberly, thank you so much for your time today. I think you gave the listeners a lot of things to think about, again, whether they're at the very beginning stage or they're kind of in the thick of it and they've been having that conversation of do we list it or do we stay? I just saw a bunch of reruns of like Love It and List It. So that's what keeps coming up in my head of like, do we love it and we want to stay, or do we want to list it in, the
Right.
divorce area here. But if you could just give our listeners one last piece of advice that you wish every divorced couple knew going through the thought of how they deal with the house, what would it be?
I would say to find, especially on the real estate side, to find somebody who is a neutral in that, who is looking out for the best interest of the two, so that they could get the house sold if that's what they were looking to do, or to be able to work with them to figure out what the value is if one wanted to stay. Having a neutral, like selling a house is stressful and going through a divorce is stressful. And so having somebody who can really be, I don't want to say unemotional, but really just cool in the situation when emotions rise up, to be able to have really level headed options and considerations and next steps. And let's take a break and come back. Um, can help make a potentially even more stressful situation a little bit less stressful.
Yeah, I think that's great advice for all different areas of divorce, because we, again, talk a lot about on this podcast and at the Divorce Support Collective about how having that outside perspective can be so important, because we all know that we have those family members or those friends that we can call and talk to, but they are also very emotionally tied to our situation. And so they might actually ramp us up a little bit more than we need to in the situation. And so it's really great to have that third party perspective, who is not as emotionally involved in the situation, so that they can make the best decisions using their wise mind moving forward. So again, they can, go through the divorce, but also start that next chapter and begin their new version of their life and those new traditions, maybe in a new space, the best possible way as possible, without having to go back and think, oh gosh, what if I would have done that? Or maybe we should have done that. It really takes a lot of those guessing questions out of it. So Kimberly, thank you again so much for all of your time. Listeners, if you head to the show notes, you're going to be able to get connected with Kimberly, reach out to her. She's obviously a wealth of knowledge. She has a ton of experience in this and really is coming to it from a collaborative standpoint. And so don't hesitate to reach out to her. Again, you can find all of her information in the show notes and the caption. So head there, check her out. Kimberly, thank you again so much for your time today. I truly appreciate it. And listeners, we will see you on the next discussion.
Thank you for listening to the Divorce Discussions podcast. If this was helpful, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next conversation. Visit thedivorcesupportcollective.com to explore resources and connect with our professionals. Until the next discussion, remember, you don't have to navigate this alone.